If you're a developer or a tester, you've most likely heard the term API. But what is an API and why is it so important in our industry? Let's talk about it. If you're new here, my name is the Test Lead, and I make content to help you on your software testing and development journey. Today's topic, APIs. Let's start off with what is an API? API is an acronym for Application Programming Interface. And I know that sounds complex, but at its core, it's simply a way for two different systems to communicate. Think of an API as a messenger, like I said, that takes requests from point A to point B, then delivers responses from point B back to point A. These messages and responses we'll dive into a little bit later, but an API is just a connector for these. Personally, I'm a big analogy person, so to help you understand it, I'll give you two. Starting off first with my restaurant analogy. Let's say when you go to a restaurant, my favorite restaurant, Texas Roadhouse. They have good bread rolls there. When I go to Texas Roadhouse, I'm presented a menu and I choose what I want and give what I want, my request, to the waiter. The waiter then takes my request, my food order, and gives it to the kitchen. The kitchen makes my food, gives it back to the waiter. The waiter then brings my food back to me. In this example, the waiter is the API. The waiter took my request from point A and delivered it to the kitchen. The kitchen's response to my request was to make food. Once they finished making the food was given back to the waiter, then the waiter gave that response back to me. This is the same way that computer systems exchange information. I don't need to know how the kitchen is making my food in the back. I just trust when I give the waiter my request that the proper response will be returned to me. The same thing happens in computers. Computer A doesn't need to know how computer B is operating behind the scenes. It just needs to know when it gives it a certain request, a certain response will be returned. Another example is a hotel receptionist. When you go to a hotel, let's say you need a towel or some food. You tell the receptionist relays the message to the kitchen or the housekeeping and then brings you back your food or your towel. I don't need to know how the housekeeping operates behind the scenes or how the kitchen is working. I just know when I request certain things from the receptionist, I'll get the proper response I was expecting. The same thing with our APIs. And let me know down below which analogy you feel best works for this in your understanding. That way I know going forward which one I should keep using. Now that we've defined what an API is and had some analogies, let's talk about why APIs are so important. The core of all applications are APIs. Most apps today don't work alone. They rely on APIs to interact with other systems. For example, a weather application might call an API to get the latest weather forecast, or an e-commerce site may pull in real-time product prices using an API. One of the coolest things about APIs, they allow you to start testing your testing pyramid before the user interface is even built. This allows you early on to start testing core functionality instead of waiting to the end when the whole application is done with the interface. APIs are also faster and more efficient. Doing an API test can take a few seconds versus doing a user interface test. You have to wait for pages to load. That takes a little bit longer. A good test would have both API testing and UI testing, but for efficiency purposes, API is a lot better. Quick break. If you're enjoying the video so far, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you need help on your software development or testing journey, check out my website, thetestinglead.com. I have books and courses to help you on your journey. Now, back to the video. So now, let me give you an example of a real API in action. Navigate to this URL here and access this API. When you do so, you see the response returned to you on the website. So you're interacting with this API to get information from another computer system. And as a tester, you will test to make sure the filled in values you're getting back match the expected values. Now let's describe the common types of testing done for APIs. First, we have functional testing. This simply tests to make sure that an API functions or works as expected. As I mentioned earlier, when I call a certain API, is the expected API response returned, yes or no? We then have load or performance testing. When I access the API simulating 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 users, does it slow down? Does it crash? Does it still work? And last but not least, we have security testing for APIs. Because certain APIs belong to certain companies, they may not want to expose it to the world. So they'll put security measures on it to make sure that only certain people and applications are accessing these APIs. So now that we've introduced more information about APIs, I'll give you a glossary of keywords and terms you need to know. Endpoint, the URL where the API can be accessed. For example, api.example.com/products123. Request method, the type of action you want to perform with the API. Common methods include get, which retrieves data, post, which submits data, put, which updates data, delete, which removes data. Response code. When you make an API request, the server sends back a status code to let you know what happened. For example, 200 OK, which means the request was successful. 404 not found, the requested resource doesn't exist. 500 internal server error, something went wrong on the server side. Authentication. Many APIs require authentication, like API keys or tokens, to ensure that only authorized users can access them. So why care about APIs? APIs are the core and the backbone of most modern applications. Knowing how to create and test and interact with them is essential. If you found this video helpful, next up, you should watch this video here or this one down here. And more importantly, don't forget this, learn something new today.